Hello. We cannot keep putting off action on climate change. Canadians are worried about their future, but also about the present. Wildfires, flooding, extreme weather has been increasing in intensity, but also in frequency. And this bill is a step in the right direction, but it's very clear that it is not enough to protect Canadians, to protect our future, and to protect the environment. Kids should not have to worry about the air that they're breathing. Young people shouldn't have to march in the streets because politicians aren't protecting their future. This bill has no target for the next 10 years. There's no milestone for 2025, which is completely unacceptable. Also, it's concerning. We learned yesterday that the Environment Commissioner doesn't have the resources to do the important environmental audits that they're already doing. And so relying on them as part of the accountability mechanism for this new bill is concerning. It was Jack Layton who first put forward a bill in Parliament back in 2006 on climate accountability, the first ever Canadian Climate Accountability Act. And Jack would not want us to wait 10 years for real climate accountability. We are going to push the Liberals to strengthen this bill, but we also know that climate accountability doesn't work without climate action. So we're also going to be pushing them for investments in clean energy, in retrofits of buildings, in public transit, in the kind of investments that will create good family-sustaining jobs in the low-carbon economy. We're going to keep pushing them for climate accountability, and we're going to keep pushing them for climate action. Thank you.
And we'll now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. We have about 10 minutes, so one question, one follow-up per reporters. Nous allons maintenant passer aux questions, commençons par les questions au téléphone. Nous avons à peu près 10 minutes pour les questions. Donc, une question suivie par journaliste. Operator, do we have a question?
Thank you. Merci. The first question is from Marika Wash, the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi there. I'm wondering what specifically you want changed in this legislation, and have the Liberals made attempts to negotiate with you on this legislation, or where does that stand?
The first thing is we want a 2025 milestone target. We want strong accountability. The world's top scientists have been telling us that the next 10 years are the most important. And so why would this Liberal government put off real accountability until 2030? And there's no assessment of whether or not they're meeting targets until 2 years after that. I have met with the Parliamentary Secretary and the Minister of Environment many times over the past year, and I've expressed how urgent it is that we take action on the climate crisis and that we have strong accountability. I'm disappointed that there is no real accountability in the next 10 years, and I will be pushing them very hard to make sure that we strengthen this bill so that it actually does the important work that we know is needed.
And so will the NDP support the bill in its current form? And when you say you want real accountability, what other accountability mechanisms do you want to see?
Thanks for the question. So this bill is a step forward. It's a very small step forward. It's better than what we had before, but it is in no way adequate to the crisis that we're facing. And it in no way responds to the fact that the next 10 years are the most important. So we're going to be pushing first to get that 2025 milestone target in and to make sure that there's progress reporting with that milestone target, that there's an assessment. The other pieces of accountability that I'd like to see in this bill include strengthening the Environment Commissioner's office, and that means making the Environment Commissioner an independent officer of Parliament. Right now, they are not an independent officer. They're within the office of the Attorney General, and I really see that role as vitally important when it comes to accountability. And many times over the past decade, MPs have spoken about the vital work that the Environment Commissioner does and the need to strengthen that role. It was David McGuinty, a Liberal, who first put forward a motion to make the Environment Commissioner an independent office, and I hope that the Liberals will consider doing this so that we have the kind of accountability that we need. Also, the Arm's Length Advisory Committee, I think that their role in assessment, in reporting, needs to be clarified and strengthened. We need representation from all across Canada. We need Indigenous leadership representation, making sure that the voices of diverse groups all across Canada have a say in whether or not the plan is adequate, whether or not our target is ambitious enough, and also have a role in looking at, are we actually meeting the commitments that we've made?
And we'll now take a question from the room. David?
Hi, MP Collins. David Thurton, CBC News. So just in answer to Marika's question, is the NDP going to support the bill as is?
You know, we are going to push the Liberals to amend it. Honestly, it is an improvement. And so we want to, any step forward, we definitely want to see. But I am going to be pushing very hard to make sure that we can strengthen this bill. I think we are hearing from our stakeholders, from environmental organizations, and from Canadians that they want real climate action and they want real climate accountability. I think it would be an error for this Liberal government to ignore that fact.
So this isn't so much a follow-up, but it's a different question. What do you think about the enforcement mechanisms? Because as I understand it, it's merely just stating whether or not you've achieved your targets, and if you didn't, explaining what would happen. So there's no real consequences. What do you think about that element of the legislation? You know,
we need to model this legislation off of legislation that's worked in other jurisdictions. We know that the UK model of climate accountability has worked. Part of that is making sure that you have an arm's length independent body who is reviewing it and who is transparently publicizing not only has the government achieved the target, but also what steps are they going to do to get back on track if they haven't. Right now, as the bill is, really it's the minister who is accountable to himself. The Environment Commissioner has a small role. They're required to do one report every 5 years, but we know that there is progress reporting, there's assessment reporting, and then there is the plan and the hopefully more ambitious target, because we know our current targets are not adequate. Stephen Harper's targets we know are not adequate, and this government has been saying they will exceed that target, but we still don't know by how much. And so we would like to see this strengthened. We'd like to see it modeled after the kind of legislation that has worked in other jurisdictions. The UK reduced their emissions year after year, starting in 2008. If we had have actually put in place Jack Layton's bill in 2006, we wouldn't be in the place we are now, which is that we have increased our emissions year after year after year. Canadians are disappointed.
We'll now take a next question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Forrest, Politico. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Yes, thank you. Just want to get back to that question about the NDP's conditions for supporting this bill. Would you say at this point that the NDP will vote against this bill if Liberals don't put in place a 2025 target?
Right now, we're focused on pushing the Liberals to amend the legislation. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that they put that 2025 milestone target in place, that there is strong accountability in place. You know, we can't keep putting off action on climate change. Not only do we want to see that 2025 milestone in place, some kind of real accountability in the next 10 years, but we also are going to be pushing them to make sure that their plan includes investments in green infrastructure, in public transit, in the kind of green infrastructure that will create good low carbon jobs, the kind of jobs that Canadians need from coast to coast to coast.
Okay, thanks. And as a follow-up, one of the questions that came up, of course, in the technical briefing this morning several times was around consequences and the lack of consequences for failing to meet targets. Officials said it's really basically impossible to enforce climate targets. There aren't really consequences that you can apply. Would you agree with that?
You know, I think we need to look at the jurisdictions at work. So the UK model, which has worked, they've reduced their emissions year after year since when they implemented the climate accountability in 2008. And the way that they did that is they had strong accountability structures and 5-year milestone targets starting right away. And they had an arm's length body that did the assessment that actually creates some separate accountability so the government isn't policing itself. And that doesn't mean that there is some kind of, I'm not sure the word that I'm looking for, but it doesn't mean that there are necessarily repercussions for the government other than that this arm's length independent body is transparently reporting to the Parliament and to the public. And it has worked. Unfortunately, this bill doesn't have that. It doesn't have 5-year targets, really, because we don't have a target in 5 years. And it doesn't have the kind of strength in the accountability mechanisms, both in the advisory committee and in the Environment Commissioner, that we need to see to make this work.
And next question will be in the room. Mike?
Yeah, hi, Mike Blanchfield, Canadian Press. Let's try this another way then. Will you, if you can't get any movement on this at all, is this bill good enough, and are you willing to support it? The Greens have a different view. What will you do if you can't get even some incremental changes to the direction you're pointing to?
Well, first of all, this bill is not good enough. It is absolutely inadequate. It is a small step forward. It's a small step in the right direction. So I'm glad that we have a bill on the table that we can push the Liberals on. I'm glad that we're finally seeing some step towards climate accountability. But no, it is not enough, and we are going to keep pushing the Liberals to amend it, to change it so that we have a target in 5 years, so that we have reporting, that we have real accountability in the most important time, which is in the next 10 years.
I would like to ask you a question on China, if that's okay. You're a British Columbia MP. We've had a lot of discussion over the last 24 hours, especially in the House of Commons, about allegations of Chinese influence in Canada. What concerns do you have about that? And your party voted for the Conservative motion yesterday regarding that. What can you say about that today?
I spoke in the House yesterday, I guess it was, or the day before. And I spoke my concerns whenever a foreign government is targeting Canadians. We need to make sure that we have strong legislation and strong measures in place to protect Canadians. I am concerned if the Chinese government is targeting Canadians. I'm concerned that I've heard reports from people in my riding that the Ethiopian government is targeting Canadians here in Canada. And so that's very concerning to me. But if you'd like to talk about the legislation itself, I can point you towards our media person, and they can get the appropriate person to follow up.
We have time for one last question on the phone, if there is one, operator.
Thank you. There are no further questions registered at this time. Nous n'avons plus de questions pour le moment.
Thank you very much.